In this scene, for instance, Ford's cameras show us a father who has just purchased a Model T Ford for his family. Junior there obviously appreciates Mr. Ford's masterpiece, and Dad has told him that if he applies himself and works hard, well, Mr. Ford himself says that any American with pluck and luck can go as far as he did.
It gives me very real pleasure to welcome you 49 young men from each state in the Union and the District of Columbia. But let me say this to all of you. Do not count too heavily on your mental attainments. They are necessary to success. But remember always, there is no substitute for hard work.
No substitute for hard work.
I think I've persuaded Mr. Henry Ford to say one or two words to you. Mr. Ford.
Ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. President, Mr. Edison Ford. Young man, I just want to say one thing. That I am sure in my own mind there's no such thing as no chance. Thank you.
No such thing as no chance.
Well, that's another one of the thousands of cars that have passed me this morning. It has become a habit. And I traveled 25 miles since 7 o'clock this morning.
Henry Ford also said that the thousands of young men who had left their homes and gone on the road were getting a priceless education. Heartless? Well, what else can you say to these kids?
William Lyon Phelps, 41 years professor of English at Yale University, delivers a baccalaureate address to the youth of America.
The very fact that the young men and women of today have nothing easy to look forward to is a good thing for them, because the very thing that is a stumbling block to one man is a springboard to another. The very thing that crushes one man elevates another. The very thing that destroys one man's ambition stimulates the other man. And for all these things, the foundation of all the virtues is courage.
Take my advice, fellas. Hitchhiking is really tough. I've been on the road for about 6 months without getting work.
I believe in you with all my heart, and I wish you all success and happiness.
Hard work, and the race is to the swift, and the strong survive. In the America in which we felt at home, those had been everyday truths. But this America is a different place. Henry Ford, for one, never seemed to notice that. The more the old economic answers were shown to be inadequate, the harder he insisted on them. Look, these are Ford's own newsreels.
At the Ford plant, the minimum wage scale of $5 per day is reestablished. And here are just a few of the thousands upon thousands of workers who are profiting by that increase. No wonder there are smiles as these men move to and from work. Increased pay means happier families. It provides added ability to buy things that are needed. This means increased demand for motor cars. And this, in turn, means busier assembly lines and more and better paid workers. It means Detroit is regaining her stride.
Ford's economics weren't working. The Ford Motor Company was having trouble selling its cars to people who had no money to buy them. So to get sales moving again, the Ford Company offered to buy back the thousands of Model Ts still in circulation. They were then thriftily recycled, a great and typical Henry Ford stunt. But it must have galled him. He liked the idea of his flivvers living forever, lovingly tended by amateur mechanics. His was the old world idea of a perfectible product, not a novel product. But this was a new world. It was a world Henry Ford had helped to create, but it wasn't a world he understood or much liked. In the summer of 1932, thousands of the unemployed, unable to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, came to Washington to ask for relief. They weren't revolutionaries, but veterans of the First World War. They were orderly. Many had brought their wives and children. They were asking only that their bonus for war services, which was due to be paid to them in 1945, be paid now, when they needed it. They were asking to be noticed, to be seen.
I never saw such discipline. I never saw such fine Americanism as is exhibited by you people. You have just as much right to have a lobby here as any steel corporation. Yeah. Don't make any mistake about it. You've got the sympathy of the American people. Now, don't you lose it. Yeah.
That summer, Herbert Hoover, in a campaign against Franklin Roosevelt, was fighting for his political life. He had lost the sympathy of the American people. And though hardworking and well-intentioned, he had no idea how to regain it.
This peculiar significance of Valley Forge in our American annals should strike us with a special force in this particular moment of our national life. The American people are going through another Valley Forge at this time. To each and every one of us, it is an hour of unusual stress and trial. You have each of you your special cause for anxiety, and so too have I. Many have lost the savings of a lifetime. Many are unemployed. All know the misgivings of doubt and the grave concern for the future.
No doubt the men of the bonus army, ragged and hungry, compared themselves to the men of Valley Forge. Hoover did not see the resemblance. He wouldn't receive them. From his White House windows, he looked down and didn't know what to do. None of this should have been able to happen in the America that had elected Herbert Hoover president.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Republican Radio League presents Mr. Henry Ford.
Say when.
Herbert Hoover should be allowed to carry out his program, and I think he will. He has faced the enemy for 3 years now. He knows all the tactics of the forces of destruction. Mr. Hoover is carrying a greater burden than Abraham Lincoln carried. And he is carrying it in a way that places him beside Lincoln in sacrificial service. I think of him as a human-hearted, honest-minded, hard-working Hoover.
But if Henry Ford could do nothing, if the president could do nothing, who could? In Washington, the United States Army, with tanks and tear gas, was at last called out against the bonus army. The shack village they had built out on the flats, where the Pentagon now stands, was torn down and burned. The vets were dispersed. No one knew where they would go or what would become of them. Hoover had always insisted that the bonus army had been stirred up by communists in their ranks. And the government and the great newspapers warned us about listening to un-American agitators out to take advantage of our distress. But if the army and the police were all that stood between us and Red Revolution, what had become of democracy? Had free enterprise failed? Would we survive at all as a people? America was turning into a place we did not recognize, and we were faced with a future we could not imagine.
I congratulate you, Miss Dolce, on being the winner in this National Smiles contest. And I hope that everyone in the country is going to follow your example. And all of us are going to smile through our troubles and through our difficulties. And I know that it will help us all to weather these hard times.
Mrs. Roosevelt, I can truthfully say that this is the proudest moment of my life. I am grateful to you from the bottom of my heart. I pledge we will all smile and keep on smiling.
Now, wait a minute. You ain't done nothing of the kind. Ladies and gentlemen, and they ain't had nothing to do with it.
Smile. The same message came over the radio. That companionable piece of speaking furniture which people had come to love as they had loved their Model Ts.
Just direct your feet on the sunny side of the street.
Its tunes cheered us, and its voices offered hope. And to hope against hope seemed about all we could do now.
And youth comes to us wanting to know what we propose to do about a society that hurts so many of them. I say to you, do something. And when you have done that something, if it works, do it some more. And if it does not work, then do something else.
Do something. Well, we were to try through the whole of that decade to get just one small airship tied up to that glittering spike on 34th Street and 5th Avenue. And when it did not work, we tried it some more. In fact, if you look now at the newsreels and the movies and the popular magazines and listen to the songs, it seems as though we were all to keep the great American adventure afloat through sheer effort of goodwill. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Well, in 1933, in the face of what might well have been a total European-style financial collapse, we all were. And yet we were told that all we had to fear was fear itself.
I can assure you that it is safer for you to keep your money in a reopened bank than to keep it under the mattress.
And somehow it did work. The closed banks did reopen.
375.
And $1, if you had one, would still buy you dinner.
It is your problem, my friends, no less than it is mine. Together, we cannot fail.
Ladies and gentlemen, employers and employees should unite to bring prosperity back quickly. The country needs it, and it can be done. It will be done if you and I and all other good Americans unite to do our bit. Each one of us can help. There's a way. Last month, for example, I realized I'd been neglecting my personal and picture wardrobe. With purchases to make, I tried to divide them so that several merchants would profit from what I had to buy. From 6 different tailors, I bought 1 suit of clothes. Now, each one of you may not need 6 suits, but undoubtedly, each one of you is deferring the purchase of articles and needs. It is a question of the big brothers helping the little fellows.
Here's a charity that's not only practical, but positively cheerful. Mrs. Lois Jordan started in a small way to help the down and out, and now look at the business she's doing. Here, you over there, try that on. Was there ever such a jolly charity?
Quiet, 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 quiet.
Everybody quiet now. We're going to make some of the sound pictures now.
And if faith and charity weren't enough, there was always hope. Bingo, chain letters, box top contests, the Irish sweepstakes. No such thing as no chance.
I've been taking those tickets for years.
I have been taking those tickets for years.
And I always have had hope that I'll win. So.
And I always had hope that if I'll win. And this dog, my dog, I brought it up, you know, from a pup. And
2 years old now.
He's 2 years old now.
And he sure brought us this luck.
And he sure brought me this luck. We treat him right. We take care of him. And the island must be heaven because my money came from there.
Well, I got my break at last. I've been waiting for this for a long time. Now that I got it, I'm going to take care of my mother and father as good as I possibly can. I think I'll get life insurance, annuity policies, and then I'll have no worry.
Mr. DiPietro?
Yes, sir?
Hooray! I'm in the 75-ounce style.
And what do you think? How do you feel about it? And?
Why, I feel so happy I could scream.
Well, why don't you give the boys a good 2 or 3 substantial scream?
Oh! 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 It's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer.
When popular media like the newsreels did show us the lost and the hopeless, it was likely to be soap opera tragedy, couched in the thrilling language of the confession magazines.
In this unique prison, women are held for every crime from a misdemeanor to murder. A peaceful workroom, but a place of bitter tragedy. Here is the first woman in the United States sentenced for life under the new Lindbergh kidnapping law. Who can understand a woman mad with jealous rage? Rosetta was such a woman.
Girls, I want to tell you something this afternoon, and I hope you profit by it. I killed a man through jealousy, and for that vast mistake, I must spend the rest of my life in jail. Of course, here the people are very good to me, but there's no place like home, as you know. I'd much rather be home with a crust of bread and a corner to sleep in than any prison. And I hope that you, too, will see that it doesn't pay. Crime doesn't pay in any way.
But we must remember these are real people. In the darkness of the movie theater, they slipped like dreams through the viewers' minds, even as they do now through yours. Yet they lived. Their shame was real. Their hope was infectious. Their stories were true. The Depression had begun early for the farmers and the rural poor and went deeper. At first there were protests, strikes, rallies. And as the decade wore on, natural disaster was added to economic. Droughts turned the plains to deserts, to seas of dust. Outrage became despair. Farms were abandoned, so was hope.
I've lived here 25 years on this land. Up to 4 years ago, we always made a living and had plenty. Now, after 4 years of drought, we have to move away, go someplace else to make a living.
Looking for somewhere else to make a living. And yet there seemed to be no somewhere else. No place for a fresh start. America seemed stopped, stalled. Even our birth rate was declining. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, 1935.
What's your name? John Reinhardt. Where do you come from? California. How long where'd you sleep last night? Subway station.
The soup kitchens and shelters of private charity could no longer contain these things. They were visible now to everyone, everywhere, every day. The government set up agencies and relief programs and even began public works projects to create jobs. Total economic collapse wouldn't happen. Neither would revolution. But we were beginning to believe that America would be like this forever. A dime, an apple, a worn-out shoe, a cold smokestack, a line of men wearing caps or hats, waiting with terrible patience for a handout or a job. We compressed what we could no longer deny into symbols. Then perhaps they could be dealt with. What was needed was a frame, a place to stand, as someone who could counter symbols of despair with symbols of hope.
Discouragement, fear, failure. Only a few years ago, these stalked the nation. Depression haunted America. We groped, we struggled, we found the way to better times. Today, depression is a fading memory. Millions of men and women have found employment, and with it, confidence and hope.
The greatest symbol of hope was, of course, FDR himself. The camera loved Roosevelt. He was brought before us more vividly than any president had ever been by the thrilling reality of eyewitness radio. And those broadcasts became themselves events in the weekly newsreels. A voice is about to say into America's ear, "We take you now to the Oval Office in the White House. We take you now."
I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days, why it was done, and what the next steps are going to be. I recognize...
As though we were gathered around some single gigantic American fireside, we listened all together to his ideas and answers on the networks. And then in the newsreels, we watched ourselves listening. Roosevelt used these new media to promote national recovery programs of a size and scope we'd never experienced before.
And there's the answer. More work for more people with more wages. The Blue Eagle shows the way.
Wherever you see this eagle, this blue eagle, you will know that it is the sign that the man who displays it has done his part and is carrying forward the president's program.
This is Mr. Al Jolson, Marshal of the Motion Picture Industries Division of the NRA Parade. It's the biggest thrill I ever had in my life. I thought I was thrilled the night I was married, but this has got it on it.
Awesome.
I was only married to one woman. There are millions here, and they're all for the NRA and Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
The National Recovery Act was, in fact, a complex and daring piece of social legislation, an attempt to manage the economy through wage and price codes. But to most working people, it was a simpler matter than that.
I got a position at this bank after being out of work for 2 years, and am I happy?
am 100% in back of President Roosevelt's Recovery Act, and I want every one of my customers to know it.
What most of America hoped to see in the Blue Eagle and the New Deal was a happy ending to this depression. We were learning in 1001 Nights at the Movies that any story could have a happy ending.
Mr. Cromwell, I've got great news for you. What's the excitement? The Depression is over. The Depression is over? Oh, do you realize that? Factories are opening up. Men are going back to work by the thousands. Our farm products are being sold the world over. Savings accounts are heaping up. The banks are pouring out new loans. There is no unemployment. Fear has been banished. Confidence reborn. Poverty has been wiped out. Laughter resounds throughout the nation. The people are happy again. We're out of the rain.
Because the big bad wolf is gone. For a year, the Blue Eagle was everywhere. Here, a train wreck show at the Minnesota State Fair pits the NRA against old man depression. By 1935, the NRA was gone, declared unconstitutional. It hadn't anyway worked as well as people had hoped. The NRA failed, but we learned this from it, that national action could change our lives. Social Security, bank deposit insurance, unemployment relief, collective bargaining. In a sense, when the hoopla was over, the Blue Eagle had shown the way.
Mr. Bartlett, may I ask a question? Good. What are these models for?
Well, they're made for the purpose of copying for the mountain. I'm allowing an extra 3 inches on all the features in order to provide stone for the wear and tear of the elements, which cuts the figure down an inch in 100,000 years. In other words, the work will not be done for another 300,000 years as it should be.
At Mount Rushmore, our national heroes were being sculpted 1,000 times life-size. We were being told in 100 different ways that we were a unified nation with a glorious past and a wonderful future. In New York, they were still dreaming of Zeppelins on the Empire and getting a rope on one tiny blimp.
Of all things, look at the scoop the Paramount cameraman caught. It looks like a scene from 1992.
There, get this rope now.
There would be no simple solution. No parade, no technological marvel, no stunt would end this depression. It just went on and on. It was all going to be much more difficult than we had wanted to believe.
The Republican and the Democratic parties have absolutely failed to help the farmers and the laboring class of the state.
And the masses of America, 75 to 80 to 85% of the people not only give up their property year after year, but they go further and further and further into economic slavery to where the flesh and blood of the born and the unborn will never be able to raise the debt, let alone come back and rescue the properties that they've lost from these depressions.
One Man's Family, brought to you by Fleischmann's Yeast. One Man's Family is dedicated to the mothers and fathers of the younger generation and to their bewildering offspring.
We were not one family in America. The divisions in our society remained. The rich would never again be as rich as they had been, but they kept their place. On the rungs below, we worried and tried to hold on and studied new ways to get a step ahead.
The longer I live, the more certain I am that enthusiasm is the little recognized secret of success. There's a deep, gnawing human hunger that is rarely gratified. And the man or the woman that gratifies that and does it sincerely will win friends and influence people and hold people in the palm of his hand. I'm talking about the deepest principle in human nature, the craving to be appreciated.
The deeper hunger was to be safe, to be free from fear. A generation was learning what it had to do just to get a job and keep it.
I'll have no trouble selling this car. No, sir. You fellas going to sell a lot of Fords this year?
I certainly hope so.
How do you like that 1937 Ford?
Best thing on four wheels today.
Which one of you fellas going to sell the most cars?
I think I'll beat Mr.
What do you say that? What do you...
Neither is us.
How do you like this new car?
Lovely.
Put that cigar in your mouth, will you? Take a good puff at it. Attaboy.
Survival is success enough. Survival and maybe some of the tokens of status. A little security. If not for yourself, then for your kids. Dad can still bring home a new Ford for his family. It's not as cheap as his dad's Model T, but he's bought it on the payment plan. Mom is quietly proud. Junior still wants to drive, and Sis still wants to bounce on the seats. The house is mortgaged. The scene is Middletown. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed.
Investigations into the strike riot are focused on the Republic Steel Corporation's plant at South Chicago. In all, 90 men and women went to hospitals for treatment. But there were 5 who died from bullets or from head wounds. Labor leaders declared that...
In fact, the Republic Steel strike was worse, more cruel and violent than the impartial camera could or would record. Still, attempts were made to suppress this newsreel. There was fear it would incite riots. But at the same time, young photographers for the government's Farm Security Administration were bringing back pictures like these of people whom the struggles of the labor unions and the programs of the New Deal had hardly begun to touch. Did America really look like this? No one would starve, the government said. But maybe there was such a thing as no chance. And at the same time, the planners and the thinkers and the government were urging us to reimagine America. If we all worked together, they said, it could be a cleaner, better, safer place. A place where the rural poor were no longer neglected, where labor made a steady advance into the middle class, and the rich went to work every day like other folks. Throughout the decade, out of this flood of conflicting information, we were trying to assemble a picture of what America was like now. An image of ourselves that took in hard facts we could no longer deny, yet be hopeful and reassuring. Most of all, it had to be convincing. And in the end, it was. It looked, in fact, a lot like life. One life photographer said, we had an insatiable drive to search out every facet of American life, photograph it, and hold it up like a mirror to a pleased and astonished readership.
This angle, boys. Hey, you got this angle. Yeah. Hey, you got this angle.
The candid camera craze sweeps the country. Aha, Jimmy Durante.
Why, the joint has gone amok. They told me when I came over here that I'd be surrounded by beautiful girls. Who am I surrounded by? Amateur photographers. What? Snap it.
Life was a success because it did seem to us the true mirror we had been looking for. It seemed to leave nothing out. The movie stars and the politicians and the smiling families of the ads lay next to eyewitness reports of our terrible conflicts and suggested that this was all only the healthy variety of a free people. When life showed us the face of poverty, framed by ads and captions, we could feel that something should be done for these people. We could even feel that something had been done, simply by their being so truly seen. When life told us that the movie, The Grapes of Wrath, was an accurate picture of the courage and humanity of Dust Bowl refugees, it proved it in pictures. And if the Tom Joads of America did look like Henry Fonda, if the Ma Joads did look like Jane Darbo, then we could look into the faces of the homeless and the lost and not look away, and by that very act, so we felt, draw them too into the one great American family.
We're sure taking a beating.
I know. That's what makes us tough. Rich fellas come up and they die, and their kids ain't no good and they die out. But we keep a-coming. We're the people that live. They can't wipe us out. They can't lick us. We'll go on forever, Pa, 'cause we're the people.
The people, yes.
God bless America, land that I love.
The wounds of our experience had not healed, and we had not given up our old vision of what America had been and could be. But we had found a new way to state it. The America that Kate Smith sang about from a million radios had begun, once again, to look like home.
From
Wells, the celebrated English novelist, philosopher, and historian.
Is there going to be war, Mr. Wells?
No, I don't think there's going to be a great war, not a world war again, for at least the next 2 years. America is very important at the present time as a mitigating circumstance in the European and Asiatic situation.
How about the visit of the Duke and Duchess of Windsor to America, Mr. Wells?
Oh, I'm not a gossip correspondent.
Get it, Charlie, get it, Charlie. It's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh, my, get out of the way, please. It's burning, bursting into flames, and it's falling on the mooring mast, and all the folks between it. This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. It's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. It's smoke and it's flames now, and it's all the humanity and all the prayers that are screaming around here. I don't do it. I can't even talk to people. There's friends are on there. I can't talk, ladies and gentlemen. Listen, folks, I'm going to have to stop for a minute because I've lost my voice. This is the worst thing I've ever witnessed.
New York, in the network headquarters.
Columbia calling Berlin. Columbia calling Berlin. Come in, Berlin.
Die Hand des Friedens.
In our long, inward-turning struggle to find ourselves, we hadn't played much part in the world at large. Long-distance radio made the European struggles of the 30s a fascinating radio drama, but we were, so far, only the audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. We take you now to Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. The eyes are black and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is that's kind of V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips. It seemed that more state police have arrived. There's no need to push the crowd back now. They're willing to keep their distance. Wait a minute, something's happening. Humped shape is rising out of the pit. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. Hold on, will you please? I'll be right back in a minute.
The announcer in Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast had listened over and over to the Hindenburg announcer to get just the right tone of eyewitness hysteria. And was it odd that when bombs were falling in Spain and Manchuria, when sudden death from the air was a real possibility, that Welles' broadcast was convincing? It was radio. It was eyewitness. We take you now to the end of the world.
Paramount News takes you behind the scenes where television is being brought to perfection. With no faking attempted, actual transmitting and receiving are filmed for the first time. Because of the great difference in camera speed, the sharp, steady image of the televisor will not be apparent. But these are the first such pictures ever actually filmed. Philo T. Farnsworth, pioneer in the development of television.
Television is about to emerge from the laboratory to bring into your home news, entertainment, and material of educational value.
News, entertainment, and material of educational value, like perhaps this present program. Had Philo T. Farnsworth then seen the future? No, I don't believe he had. He was only in the process of inventing it. At the same time, on the site of the Great World's Fair, the Westinghouse Company was burying a time capsule, not to be opened for thousands of years. It contained everything which this present moment wanted the future to know about itself. Among many things, it contained a newsreel showing representative scenes of 1938. It presented some sports, and a fashion show, and a bombing, and a parade, and a stunt. A stunt was Howard Hughes' solo flight around the world. Howard Hughes. The fair's theme was building the world of tomorrow. The great corporations that erected pavilions at the fair were eager to forget the Depression and unwilling to imagine the war. The image of a revitalized America they offered us was wonderful and convincing. The Ford Pavilion was one of the biggest. It wasn't one of the most memorable. A Ford executive admitted that the General Motors Futurama was more exciting, but insisted that his show pushed the product better.
Mr. Ford, will you tell us...
Henry Ford was old, ill, and locked in bitter labor struggles.
World's Fair.
Fine. You go back in your car now?
Yeah.
It's right here.
When he died in 1947, a lot of people would be surprised. They thought he'd been dead for years. Over at the General Motors Pavilion, they showed us the future. And it worked. The Futurama was the fair's most popular exhibit, a highly detailed model of the wonderful world of 1960. It was good to know that once again we had a future. The men and women of the Depression decade imagined many futures for themselves and their children. Some of them grim, some of them wonderful. None of them happened. Not really. Not the future of stainless steel skyscrapers and stately zeppelins. Not the future of red revolution or endless depression. Not the Futurama. But we can only make the future out of the fears and desires of the present. There is no other way to see it. And we make out of our memories and our records the past we need. It changes as we change. There is, in the end, only the present.
This is London calling Columbia, New York. It has been decided to start evacuation of school children and other priority classes as already arranged under the government scheme. All parents of school children are strongly urged to let their children go.
The searchlight just burst into action off in the distance. One single beam sweeping the sky above me now. People are walking along quite quietly. Just the sound of footsteps walking along the street. Like ghosts shod with steel shoes.
She opens the door to the plumber, and 5 days of mental torment begin. Ivar Kent stars as the plumber. Monday night at 10, see this psychological thriller co-starring Judy Morris and directed by Peter Weir. The Plumber airs Monday night at 10 on PBS.